just a little bit of background knowledge. At the beginning of the year, Lucy put together a Python study group, and it was one of the best things I have ever attended, to be quite honest with you. We are going to share with you today our journey of the study group. If you guys are interested in giving back to the community or teaching or learning, this one is definitely for you. During the study group, we found some things and some approaches that worked really, really well, and others that flopped quite miserably. So we hope that you will take away our knowledge and our experience and build on it in the future.
Cool, so some benefits of a study group. This is a slide where I'm a cheerleader and I tell you how awesome it is. I've had a lot of help along the way when I was learning to program, and I wanted to give back to the community. Moment of full disclosure, I'm actually a Ruby developer, sorry. So as part of the Ruby community, I've helped with a lot of intro to programming events. We have Rails Girls, Install Fests, development hubs, just a few different events to let people get started with programming and ask questions along the way. These events are awesome, and I'm really grateful to the community for putting them together. But they're also pretty copy and paste tutorials, and that's true for many tutorials online. So I was tired of people missing the line that they were supposed to put it on and just getting totally stuck. They didn't understand some of the concepts behind it. They just sort of were hoping that it would work out. So I wanted to run an introductory programming study group just to help lay some foundations and answer questions as they came up. I would absolutely run an event like this again. As a Ruby developer, it meant that I got to learn some Python, but I also learned so much more than just programming. I got to meet awesome people like Nadia. I worked on my own organization skills, and I practiced public speaking, something I'm obviously using now. It was a great reminder to see how far I've come since I started programming, and a reminder about how difficult programming can be when you're just starting out. It was encouraging to see people who are just getting started and how much passion they have for it, because sometimes you kind of forget. It's really a rewarding experience, and I hope that you will do it yourself.
So, as many of you know, learning how to program can be extremely difficult because it requires motivation and persistence, but it also requires motivation and persistence at all times, even when that stupid chunk of code is refusing to work for you.
Especially that.
And you get knocked back a lot. Programming is you take 2 steps forward and it just knocks you back, sometimes all the way. And while there's so many resources out there, tutorials, books, websites, they can be quite overwhelming and intimidating because they do sometimes take on a really big topic. And like Stack Overflow, it's a great resource if you've been around for a little while. You know, if you've been around the block and you know how to navigate Stack Overflow. But when I asked my first question on Stack Overflow, somebody asked me a technical question back to clarify mine. And because I couldn't answer that one, the whole thing went unanswered, and I was too scared to look back at it again in case there were more technical questions piled on the original one. And I think with Stack Overflow as well, the time delay between the time you ask the question and the time you get a response is quite a while. Sometimes it's hours, weeks, months, and by then you would have moved on from the project, and you probably now miss out on that crucial little bit of information that you need to know.
If the question gets answered at all. I've certainly had ones that never happened.
Yeah. And so studies have found that people do usually learn better in groups because it helps to solidify concepts, and it increases engagement because you have to communicate with the person that's next to you or the people that are in the room. With that being said as well, pair programming is great because it gives students better, problem-solving skills, and they face a lot less anxiety when they have a partner to hold their hand and walk through the question together. And the best thing about learning person to person is if you don't understand something, someone can draw it out for you, step by step, circle things, write things, draw things, which is something that you lack, sometimes in the virtual world. And it really helps those that are visual learners to learn a concept, because not everyone's great at just reading something and taking all the information in. And so, just a little bit about our group.
So the platform I decided to work with was called Udacity. They have video lectures, and that helps with the visual learning that Nadia mentioned earlier. It also has questions throughout, just little quick multiple choice or fill in the blanks, something to make sure that you're paying attention and doesn't maybe walk away from the browser. At the end of the lecture, there's 5 to 10 homework problems. Some of them have answers provided, and some of them are just left up to the user.
So those are quite great because they kind of encourage you to venture out away from Udacity maybe a little bit and do your own little research on the side. However, Udacity doesn't have one big overarching project that you kind of work towards the end. Since we haven't finished our study group, they have introduced this, and I think it's great because it keeps you motivated because once you finish the course, you build something and you have something to show off to the world of show off all your newfound Python skills.
Udacity also focused just on computer science. It was going back to the basics. It wasn't flashy, you didn't end up with a website or anything, but just going back, reviewing the concepts, and making sure you really understand them. It was also free, which is something I wanted to keep into consideration since I didn't know what the financial needs of the people in the group would be.
Udacity has no, schedule or strict due dates, which means you can do the course at your own pace, a really good thing and a really bad thing. Because I tried doing this course on my own before I joined the study group, and because I never felt like the urgency of it needing to be done. It just got left behind in my day-to-day activities, and I sort of didn't look at it for a little while. But a great thing, though, is that it doesn't need any setup. Everything is done straight out of the browser. That means you don't need to download anything, you don't need to install anything. And I used to remember when I first started out, if the tutorial started with, type this into the terminal, I'd be like, no, and run for the hills.
Since everything was done in the browser, it saved me a lot of time that we didn't need to mess with having different operating systems and this doesn't quite work on my machine. It just made things a lot simpler. Udacity was in PyCon, so obviously that's what we were working with, and of course it has a lot of amazing learn to program resources, so you obviously already know about those. I chose PyCon because I wanted to learn something as well. As a Ruby developer, that's what I do all day at work, but I wanted to go home and try something else, just see what else is out there. It was similar enough to Ruby that I could still be helpful, but different that I could learn something. And of course, Python has fantastic indentation practices. Since Ruby doesn't care, I would start working with people who were just starting out and they didn't get how that would help with readability. So to work with Python and just be like, no, you got to do it. It would help clarify.
Sometimes I always hear nightmare stories about teachers at universities marking code, and it's just this one 3,000 line with no indentations. So the indentations are important, which is good.
The course was also free, but only kind of. I charged $10 per meeting that you missed. So to do this, I collect money at the beginning as though you were going to miss everything, and then at the end I gave you money back for the meetings you had attended. Any money that was left over was distributed to people who had come to all of the meetings. So this was borrowed from Gym Pact by some Harvard behavioral econ students. It wasn't my idea, but I thought it was a nice way to encourage you to attend.
I thought it was very motivating to have a monetary incentive to keep you attending. It was the best $50 I never spent. Because you paid enough that you cared about attending it, but not so much that you cried over it or it was just too expensive in the first place for you to pay. And because I attended all the meetings, I ended up getting a bit of extra cash in the end, so it was I got paid to attend the study group.
It wasn't a lot. I think
it was
$12.
$12.
So it was a little bit.
Yeah.
Some lessons that I learned while I was going through this. They're not really about programming, they're just about study groups and programming ones in particular. They're really language independent, so if you don't want to work with Python, because that's what you go do all day at work, you're welcome to try something else and see how you go. As I said, I'm running one in JavaScript right now, and you can try one in Ruby maybe. So these lessons are for you if you do decide to run one, and I hope a few of you will. A big one for me was to manage expectations. As Nadia mentioned, there's no final project to point to, and I think probably people thought that they'd end up with something they could at least show their mom and just this is some bit of the internet that I made happen. But that wasn't there, and I should have made that more clear. You're also not going to get a job at the end of this. It's not a 3-month boot camp. It's not anything super intense. It's just a one-on-one course, and there for the basics.
I think some of the people that had done the study group with us have continued learning how to program, and I think 2 of them got programming jobs, junior programming jobs. So that was really good to see a little bit of results. And while Udacity is advertised as a beginner's course where no prior programming experience is required. I felt like this was definitely not the case. Because Udacity is, I guess what you'd expect from like a really well-seasoned, mature computer scientist to build for beginners, having completely forgotten how hard it was to be a beginner in the first place.
The course is taught by a UVA professor. It's sort of a web port of his one-on-one course, but I think they had to condense it just to fit into the time frame. It was really challenging.
It was, I guess, one of the first classes that they have offered. So since then, now that with all the courses they have built now, they have improved that quite a bit. They have paced the course a little bit better. And for the course that they currently do have on there, they have added lessons in between the lessons they had previously to try and fill in the knowledge gaps, because sometimes it did kind of run over some things a little bit too quickly.
I use pair programming at work, and I think it's awesome. I think it's a really great way to share knowledge and sort of bounce ideas off each other and force you to verbalize things. So I was like, oh, doing an introductory course, this is going to be great. That wasn't really the case as much. I thought that people would go home, watch the lectures, come in, sit quietly in their chairs, answer things as they went along. It was going to be very civil, but it didn't work.
Yeah. So because I think the reason why for us pair programming failed so hard was just because pair programming, I think, requires like a certain level of familiarity with both the material and the person you're working with, and it just wasn't available on our first meeting because the people that had come to the study group had come from all walks of life, all sorts of professions, and they came from all varying levels of sort of programming knowledge.
Since it failed so hard that first time, I was really scared off and I didn't bring it up again. I think that pair programming would be really great in a course like this, but maybe like a few lessons in and just not right at the beginning. Since pair programming didn't work out, we all went through the problems as a group. We could have just sort of split up and sat there one-on-one or individually and asked questions as they come up. But I thought that working as a group would sort of simulate that need to put things into words that pair programming has without it being like quite as intense as pair programming is, and just force you to understand which concepts you are missing.
We rather, were incredibly lucky because the people that we ended up having at the meetings were very supportive and amazing. It was nice because like sometimes I'd muster up like all this bravery to ask this question, which I thought was really, really stupid. But then I'd see like people in the room sort of nod along, and I was like, I just knew that I wasn't as alone as I felt like I was all the time. And when I like attended a study group, I could just throw my question out there, and then you just have like 6 or 7 minds like chugging at it slowly, thinking their way. And although a person might not be able to answer the whole question, they might start it, which might spark an idea in someone else's mind. And they would take whatever that has been given, they would build on it, and so forth, until we'd come up with the right answer. So that was really good. And I think sometimes as a beginner as well, when you don't know all the capabilities of a language or programming, or when you don't know the terminology, sometimes it's very hard to phrase together a question. So when you are face to face, you can kind of like hand gesture your way to the question that you're trying to ask. And it was also very helpful because even Lucy sometimes would say, I don't know, to a question.
A lot.
And just to see a professional programmer say that, it just made programming so much more approachable, and it built like an environment where you could ask as many questions as you needed without being afraid to.
For me, a really big thing to learn was how long it takes. The course was 7 lessons long, and I assumed it would take 7 weeks to get through, but that was just totally inaccurate. We tried that at first, and then it turned out that we would meet twice per lesson. So you'd go home, watch the video lectures, and come in and just discuss all of the topics that you didn't quite understand. Then you could go home and do the homework problems, or at least try to. And again, we'd meet and go through those answers, answer any questions that had come up.
So as she said, that we expected the course to take a lot less time, but it was very encouraging because people continued to attend. And I think another reason why our study group took a little bit longer was about halfway through, I think it was, we decided to take a lesson or 2 out and learn how to use Git and GitHub, which was great because GitHub, knowing how to use GitHub and Git is a great skill, obviously. It's applicable anywhere, and it was one that I could utilize straight away the second I stepped out of the study group.
Udacity is also realizing just how long this takes. When I originally put up the course, it was back in February. They advertised that it would take about 6 weeks to get through. By April, they said 2 months. By June, when we were finishing up, they said 3 months. And they now think it should take about 75 hours. So even if you don't use Udacity, if you do run a group, it's just really important to think about how challenging programming can be. However long you would expect it to be, just double it and build that into the schedule. And certainly let people have the time to ask questions as needed.
Yeah, and sometimes like certain concepts will take a lot longer than others, and you definitely want to accommodate for those and let those concepts sink in. So in terms of organization of the group, Lucy sent out 2 emails a week, one just the night before the meeting to remind you to turn up, and another one after the meeting. Now this one was very important because it clarified what was expected of me before I turned up to the next group, just to make sure I get all the work done, so that when you do meet, that precious time that you have together is maximized, not because you're trying to catch up from last week, but you just want to be prepped for that group. And for the study group, we met once a week, and I think meeting once a week is really good as well, because it slips into your weekly schedule, and it's really easy to attend, as opposed to, say, like fortnightly or monthly meetings. So weekly meetings is okay.
We didn't meet one week, just the way schedules worked out, and we had way less people the next week. I wasn't really expecting that, so I think it's important to have that consistency. I also think that the weekly meetings are important, just that if you have a question, you can get it answered reasonably quickly. But if you only meet like once a month, as I know some groups do, then you have this whole like month where you're sitting on this one thing that you didn't understand.
And progression's a bit slower, obviously, if you only get questions answered once a month, if you remember them.
For me, kind of an emotional thing I needed to deal with was expecting dropouts. I had 10 to 12 people sign up, but then we ended up with 6 people being consistent attendees.
As like an attendee or a student, I suppose, it was quite nice to have a smaller group, because it just meant that you could speak up easier when there are meeting people looking at you. And it was just nice to have a smaller group, because it just meant you could have more tutor and student time.
But as the organizer, I really wasn't sure, was it me? Did they not like the group? Was it the way Udacity was laid out? I got kind of like stressed out about it. So there's something just to be like emotionally ready for. For the JavaScript group that I'm running now, I had 10 people drop out before the first meeting. These people like hadn't met me, they hadn't seen how the group would work. I'm pretty sure they hadn't done any of the homework assigned yet. So my theory is that they want to believe they want to be programmers more than they actually want to be programmers. So just like have that in the back of your mind. It's probably not you, it's probably them. A few ways to combat this is just to advertise the course earlier. I had the course up for about 3 weeks before we started, and that wasn't really enough time for it to get outside of my social network. Like, most of my friends are programmers, and obviously they didn't want to take a one-on-one course, so it needs to be like friends of friends of friends. And of course, the easiest thing is just to overbook. Like, I ended up having a 50% dropout rate, so for my JavaScript, I just overbooked by 50% to make up for that. I also ran a retro at the end of the course just to get some feedback and see what could be improved. I had an anonymous form open for the whole length of the course, but literally no one used it at all.
With that being said, though, I think it's still quite important just to have the anonymous form available there, just in case some people aren't so brave about telling you some feedback. And I think it would have been really helpful to run the retros twice, one halfway through the study group and one at the end, because the one halfway through would, I guess, give you the feedback that was necessary to implement and improve the study group in for the second half.
With any retro, it can kind of be some tough love. You know, you're hearing things that you need to improve on. But it's really important to be receptive, especially if you're starting out on a course like this. Most of these people probably haven't been part of a retro before, and so it's important for them to like see this as a positive experience where they can give feedback that gets acted upon.
And I think once they do give you the feedback, take the time to internalize it, understand what they're trying to say, and be willing to improve, because it's only going to be good for you next time you run a retro. Now, just some roles and parts that are required to make the study group happen.
So So first is the organizer. This is a role that I play, but anybody can do it. And I think it would be really awesome if it was somebody who wanted to get into programming and they just put the group together on their own. The organizer asks for registrations. They find a space that has desks and PowerPoints, all the normal things. They find hopefully some tutors to answer questions as you go along, although you can run the group on your own if you're feeling adventurous. You pick the platform. I picked Udacity, but there are a bunch out there. And if you really want to go for gold, you can come up with a curriculum on your own.
Extra brownie points for you.
They also send out the emails to make sure that everybody's hanging out on track. As the organizer, you're kind of required to be at every meeting. So if you want to do a group like this, but you know you're kind of flaky, if you take on this role, you really can't drop out because you're the one who's like, okay, this is what we're doing next week. And if you're not there, you're not going to know.
And you might, if you are the one offering the office space, you kind of have to be there to let the people in. So just don't flake out on the people. Just in case there's some people in this room that aren't programmers already or are thinking about learning how to do Python, if you don't do Python already, I would say take the leap of faith and join a study group. I think you'll learn a lot. You will learn much faster than being completely on your own because you can obviously ask questions, get feedback, and I think it's a great environment. You will learn, I guess, to prep for the real world in case one day you do become a programmer, so I say join. And for the Python pros that are in this room, I'd say also join a study group, just join one as a tutor, because it will definitely help to refresh your memory, on some concepts that you haven't used in a little while, and dust off the cobwebs. And it's a great way to continually practice your communication skills, especially when it comes to explaining some concepts that are quite difficult and explaining them in a way that is friendly to those that are just starting out. And for all you know, the junior that you're going to hire next might be in that room already with you. So definitely join one. And with that being said though, I think the one thing we have to stress about being a tutor though is make sure the people that are attending the study group are responsible for their own learning. Don't feed them the answers. You just want to explain to them concepts and give them ideas and get their minds working, but don't just spoon feed them the answers like these tutorials do. Give them the tools that is necessary for them to get to the correct answer on their own. I think, like we said before, being a tutor is a great way to give back to the community. I have relied on so much of the people around me and the people of the internet to teach me how to program because I didn't do it through university. So I definitely owe it a lot to those people for dedicating their time, a chunk of their life to answering my question. So I hope that one day when I'm really experienced, I can give back. But since you guys are, so I definitely say join now.
And finally, facilitator. This is totally a bonus role. It's not required, but I think it's nice. Facilitator is somebody who goes through the course like a student. They just do all of the material and the homework like anybody else. But they have some past programming knowledge that they can build on. So I was a facilitator for our group because I already knew Ruby, but I was new to PyCon. I think that this helps with group programming. It means that you have somebody there to sort of guide everybody in the right direction, but it also means that you can learn as you go along and ask questions as you need to. It helps solidify your concepts. That there's some stuff there in this course that I hadn't gone over since my own 101 days, but it was nice to go back and see how it all fit together again. Of course, since I don't know Python, I couldn't give the most Pythonic responses to the answers. So it's nice to have the tutors there to clean everything up and answer questions as they come along. But I do think the facilitator helps people sort of interact and can organize the code as you go through it.
Yeah, and I guess this is a bonus role because you can be a facilitator and an organizer. So, yeah, quite optional.
Some references that we've used throughout. My original advertisement for the course is up on my website, so if you're thinking that maybe you'd like to run a study group, I hope maybe some of you will, you're welcome to take this one as outline, or if you want to just see what I've said is true, you can see it there as well. The sources from the studies that Nadia mentioned are at the very beginning of the talk as well.
And the slides from today's talk are up already. They are at tinyurl.com/python-study-group.
Finally, all of the icons from today's talk were from the Now project. These artists produce their work for free and allow anybody to